Good evening, everybody. I'm hoping that you can all hear me. If you can't, certainly let me know, or if you need to, Lauren, you can just unmute yourself and buzz in and let me know that I'm unhearable. We've got quite a few people logged in, and I know this usually takes me pretty much almost a full hour, so I'm going to kind of get started. We might have a few people kind of straggling in, but I don't want to feel like we have to rush too much. So my name is Michelle Collins. I'm with the Small Business Development Center at SUNY Canton, and we've been doing this workshop with the help of ANCA for 3 years now. We've been doing it maybe a couple of years. And we're really just trying to help people, this particular program, I think we originally had in mind to help people prepare for the buyer days. But as you'll see when we go through this, there are certainly a lot of tips and information pieces that will apply to any type of wholesale show. And we go through also some very general wholesaling tips and how to evaluate if wholesale is the right market for you too. So hopefully it should be a good intro to wholesaling in general. And then of course Lauren, who probably all of you know, is on here as an organizer as well. So I've asked her to jump in whenever she thinks of something that maybe I've missed or something she can add. So for those of you who are not familiar with GoToWebinar, or if you are familiar with it, even a little bit of refresher, you'll have a little taskbar down the right side of your screen, and you'll see a little orange arrow kind of over on the left-hand side. If you hit that, that will close that taskbar for you, so you can get it out of the way if it's kind of blocking your view. And then if you want to open it back up, you can just click that arrow again. All of the attendees, all of you who are listening, are muted right now. And that's really not because I don't want to hear from you, but because we want to make sure that we drown out any background noise or anything like that. I don't think you'll hear too much from here. I think I'm the only person in the building here, but if something crazy happens while I'm here, you'll be able to hear it. If you want to ask a question and you'd like to speak, you could certainly hit in that dashboard. You'll see there's a button that says unmute. You can hit that, and that will unmute your mic, and you can break in with a question, and that's totally fine with me. Or if you prefer, there's a little question box a little further down where you can type a question in, hit enter, and that will send it to me. And then hopefully I will keep my eye on that and be able to answer those questions as we go along. The other thing you should see in your dashboard is a number of handouts. Those you can download now if you'd like. You can open them up as we go through. I have them here, and I'll open them up and kind of talk about them as we go through as well. So those are there for you. And I believe that they will be in the email, the follow-up email that you'll get after the webinar. If not, I can certainly email them to you all, because I have your emails from your registration. And please don't be afraid to ask any questions. I like to keep this as open as possible, and hopefully we can get you the answers that you need. And I did want to remind you too that at the end of the webinar, there's a survey that we'll ask you to take just to evaluate the webinar. It helps us, part of the purpose for that is to help us to know if there are other topics that you're interested in or are needing. And also it will help us to evaluate, what we've done and if we can do some things to make it better. I've set that as a pop-up at the end of the webinar, but I'm a little new to GoToWebinar, so the last time we tried it, that didn't work, so it may or may not work, but as a backup, I've made sure that you'll all get an email with the link for the survey in it. So if it doesn't pop up, then please look for the email and fill the survey out if you wouldn't mind taking a minute to do that. If it does pop up, then don't worry about the email. You don't have to do 2 surveys, just one will be fine, and that would be fabulous. So I think that is all of the housekeeping things that I need to do. I just want to double check and make sure. Lauren, can you see the slides?
I am not seeing them right now.
I think I have to do this.
Oh, there they are.
There it is. Okay. I wasn't exactly sure which button to push, so now we got it. And also, too, I'll give you kind of all fair warning. I've used GoToWebinar a lot as an attendee, but not as a presenter so much. So if some crazy technical thing happens and I flub everything up, hang in there. I'll come back to you. So don't think that I just kind of left you all hanging in the middle here. Hopefully that doesn't happen. And I was a little afraid this afternoon with the crazy wind we were getting here that we might get blown offline, but that seemed to settle down. So I think we're going to be safe. So today we're going to be talking about strategies that can help you have a successful wholesale show. And so these are kind of some of the things they're going to talk about. And I think one thing that's really important is people don't always think about why they should wholesale or if it's right for them. So we're going to talk about that. Then we'll talk about getting your business ready to sell wholesale because it's a little different than selling retail, and you want to make sure you're prepared so that you can be as successful and profitable as possible. Then we'll get into some of the more show-specific stuff, like getting ready for a wholesale show and some of the things that you need to do to be prepared to make the most of the show, and things that you can do while you're at the show and after, also to make sure that you're making the most of your experience. And as I mentioned before, ANCA and the SUNY Canton SBDC are your hosts, so that's where our information has been coming from. So the first thing we want to talk about is why wholesaling may or may not be a good idea for you. And so there are some good things about wholesaling and some other things that may not quite work for your business or that you may not be ready for yet. So one thing that's really nice about wholesaling is that you have a much more predictable schedule of what your sales are going to be. And especially after you've been doing it for a while, you know that you're producing based on the orders that you have, so there's not as much waste. With retail, you may knit 50 winter hats and you may sell 20, and then the others you have to mark down. If you're wholesaling those same hats and someone orders 50, then you've sold 50. So a lot of people like that about wholesaling. So you don't have that that conundrum of should I mark this down or should I try to save it and resell it next year and those kinds of things. The other thing that's a benefit to wholesaling is that it can give you a much bigger exposure than you might get if you just have a small retail shop or if you're just doing the show circuit. Because every retailer that you end up with your products in is reaching a different market and potentially getting people that you would not have had contact with for retail sales on your own. So it kind of gives you more reach, and that's another positive thing. There are some things that are, I call them cons, but they're not necessarily bad things, but just things that you want to be aware of going into this. One is that you're going to have a smaller profit margin. When you sell at retail, there's no one in between there that's taking a portion of the profits. When you're selling wholesale, obviously, the retailer has to be able to buy your product at a price where they can put it in their store and mark it up and resell it at a profit. And so that doesn't in and of itself mean that you shouldn't be wholesaling, but the idea is that you may have a smaller profit margin, but you should be doing more volume because you're getting that greater exposure. One thing to be aware of is that as a person selling wholesale, you're kind of reliant on the retailers and the other people that are selling your products to market and move product for you. So, if you sell a product to a store and they don't have it displayed well and it doesn't move, you don't have a lot of control over that. If you get a good relationship with your retailers and your wholesale accounts, then lots of times you can kind of help them through that, but it does take away a little bit of the control. And then, as a wholesaler now, probably, especially getting started, the way you're going to get in touch with a lot of these retail stores or resellers is by doing wholesale shows, and that's probably going to involve show fees and travel. It is possible to do cold calling with retailers, but it's sometimes difficult because they're, if they're in their shop, they're busy with other things, and they're expecting to go to these shows specifically for inventory purposes. So considering all of those things, you want to make sure that wholesaling is right for you. And there are some businesses that just decide this is not, the right market for me, and that's perfectly okay. There are others that decide, it may be a very good opportunity and they want to pursue that. So probably the first thing you really want to be thinking about is your pricing structure. Can you sell your wholesale product at a price that's going to make the retail store owner happy and still allow you to make enough profit? And you want to kind of also be aware of, what that end retail price is going to be. If the retailer has to mark it up, so much that people are unwilling to pay that price for the product, then it may not work. A good rule of thumb, but I always tell people that you really want to go through your own pricing breakdown yourself. A good rule of thumb is that most retailers will probably double what they've purchased the product from you. And again, don't take that as gospel necessarily, but kind of giving you a starting point. So you want to be aware of that. And then you also want to be aware of the fact that wholesale buyers have a budget to operate within as well, and are they going to want to buy your product at the price that you want to command for wholesale. So there's a couple of pricing worksheets that are in those handouts, and I'll pull those up. I would encourage anybody who is thinking of doing wholesale to sit down with Lauren or with someone from the SBDC. We have offices here in Canton. We also have one in Plattsburgh. I guess those are probably the closest for you. We do have one in Albany area as well, and Watertown. And sit down with somebody and really go through your pricing thoroughly and make sure that you've accounted for everything and that you're going to be profitable. Don't just take a random formula and plug yourself into that. So the first document here that I included in the handouts is this pricing worksheet. And this is an Excel file that, again, you can use afterwards. And it's basically a way to take your items. You can put your item number down in here. You could put a description. You start with figuring out what your manufacturing cost would be. How much does it cost you to produce this product? And so in this case, in the example, it costs $7. And then we have to take a look at, well, what would the wholesale price be? If we follow that rule of thumb for this example and double it, that would make the wholesale price $14. So there's also a couple of calculations in here, these red columns for distributors, and that's if you've got someone who's buying your product to then resell it to the retailer, so you're kind of putting another middleman in there. I don't think that's probably the case for most of you, so I'm just going to skip over that. But as you can see, if you're working with a distributor, you're going to have to take a little bit less because now there's another person in there taking a portion of the profits. So what that means is that your gross profit margin on this particular product is $7 when you sell it directly to the wholesaler. And then over here we have a calculation of different markups and margins for retailers, just to kind of give you an idea. So when you're talking to retailers and if they're telling you I need a 20% margin on everything that I sell, this will tell you what their retail price would be. And so in this case it would be $17.50. And I've got a breakdown down here of how those are all calculated. And then once you get familiar with it, you'll be able to go through and just kind of plug in numbers and we'll do the calculations for you. This is kind of a nice reference to have on hand because you can talk to a retailer and they might say, well, I need to make a 30% margin on that. I wonder what that would mean. You go, oh, 30% margin, that would be $20. And they'll be a little impressed with you and be like, oh, great, she really knows her stuff. So this is just something that you can play with to kind of see, you know, if it costs me a certain amount of money to make this product and then the wholesaler is going to pay this much, at the end, you know, the end consumer, would they be willing to pay $17.50 for this product, or would they pay $20 for this product? And evaluate your product, you know, that way. Again, try to be, you know, as honest as possible. I know we like to think that our products are all the best, and they probably are. I'm seeing a lot of your products, and they are fabulous, but you really want to keep in mind the consumer mindset and what they're going to be willing to pay. Oh, I forgot the other pricing worksheet. Jeez. The other one right here. This is an example, and this is one that's a little bit more customized. And so, you know, you would maybe be able to take this, again, it's in an Excel file. You would maybe be able to take this and kind of duplicate it, adding in your own particular product, or this is something you can go through with Lauren or with one of us at the SVDC. This is a lady that made decorative shirts that I worked with quite a few years ago, actually. And what we did was break down the pricing of all of her products. And we did it this way. We broke down the material cost, you know, how many yards or meters of material it took to make a certain design, a certain shirt, and how much that fabric cost. You know, the ribbons, the buttons, the interfacing, heat bond thread, some appliques, all kinds of things, whatever, you know, raw materials go into your finished product, and you can price those all out by piece. And so then you come up with a total for your raw materials. And then we have to include labor, and I think that's something that a lot of people, especially if you're an independent producer, forget to do. You know, you forget to account for the cost of the time and the expertise and the skills that you have in making this product. So we included here, obviously, you know, if we're making shirts, there's some sewing involved, how much time it typically took this lady to sew her shirts, and then we plugged in an hourly rate. This is where a lot of people get kind of hung up, because they say, well, you know, how much do you pay someone an hour to make this particular product? So that might require a little bit of research. I know Department of Labor has a lot of, you know, average pay rates for different types of industries and things like that. We can look at that. I've had some people do it just kind of based on their own need, knowing I need to make, you know, $10 an hour or $15 an hour or whatever it is. Another way to think about this is, you know, especially if you're a sole producer, what if, you know, the event arises that I need to hire someone to do this? How much would I have to pay them? Because then, you know, you've accounted for the labor if you begin to grow and you do need to pay someone. And so there's a few different ways to go through that. She did some of her own applique work. Up here you can see we included appliques, some that you know, she had some other people do for her. Down here she did her own applique work on some pieces, so we figured that out. And then sometimes she had contracted labor where she would pay people just to, you know, kind of piece together a few basic things because they could do it really quickly, and whatever that cost was. So this section is going to be different for everyone depending on what, you know, your labor pieces are in production, and if they're things that you do yourself or other people do or some combination. And those are the relatively easy parts of this pricing. Those are the concrete things that you can really, you know, see and think about. Where it gets tricky is this overhead area. And that's, you know, something that's a little bit harder, and I think this is something that oftentimes gets forgotten or gets grossly underestimated when people really aren't thinking about everything that goes into this. So in her case, this particular lady sold her custom clothing at different shows and trade fairs, and so her business relied heavily on travel. So she had picked events that she was going to go to for the year, and we priced those out, and she figured in, you know, what her travel expense would be. We factored in some utilities because there's sewing machines and some equipment that was using electricity. We factored in her insurance costs. You may have other overhead. You may be paying rent. You may have, maybe a licensing or, some sort of subscription that you need to keep up. Any of those types of things that would go into keeping your business running. And so basically you want to think of overhead as any expense that you have that you're going to incur just to keep the business operating, whether you make one product or not. What is it that I have to do to be able to just stay in business? And so that would be things like insurance and rent and utilities. The utility company isn't going to say, oh, you didn't sell any products this month? Well, never mind on the bill. So you want to make sure that those costs are included so that you're able to cover those. And then typically we would break that down by the average number of units that you produce, whether it's, in this case we did it by month. It might be by day, it might be by 6-month period, whatever the time period is, but we want to kind of be able to designate an overhead cost per unit of what you produce. And then we added in all of those things, the raw material, the labor, overhead, and then this is the price that gives you break even. And I think a lot of people often stop here. They take a look at what it takes to produce this and what my overhead is, and then they say, okay, that's my price. Well, that's your base price. That's your break even. So if you make your products and you charge this particular price, you're going to be able to keep operating because you're going to be able to continue and pay your overhead expenses, but you're not going to be profitable. And this is the important part because this is the one that puts money in your pocket. So you want to, add on to each piece what that profit margin would be. And that is going to vary greatly depending on what your personal needs are, what your expectations are, what's common in your industry. Sometimes it could be based on the level of expertise or your reputation. So this is kind of the part that gets very, wishy-washy. And so again, I would encourage you to take some time with someone at the SBDC or with Lauren and kind of go through these things so that we know that you've evaluated everything thoroughly. And again, some of these things are things that you might need to think through a little bit and do some research to kind of figure out. So do we have any questions so far? Does anybody have anything that they're wondering, or I don't see any questions being typed in yet. There's one. They give me a very tiny box to look at here. Okay. So for some of you, it looks like the PDF link for those attachments aren't working, so I'll make sure that I get those emailed to you after the fact. So you'll have those, and I'll pull them all up so you'll get a chance to look at them tonight. So now what we want to talk about is, pricing, I already did that, talk about production. So you want to be thinking about, not only is wholesale correct for you in terms of price and if you can make enough profit, but also if it's going to work for you in production terms. And there's a lot of, things in there that need to be considered. First of those is, can you produce easily in volume? Because usually wholesale is going to require some sort of bulk order. How much that is going to depend highly on the industry that you're in, the type of product, what the retailers are looking for. If you make a highly customized product, something that, every product is unique and different, it may be harder for you to produce in volume. Not impossible, but it may be harder. So you'll have to think about, is this something that if I get an order for 20 or 50 or 100, am I going to be able to produce that in a timely manner? If you have a highly customized product, it's not always necessarily taking you out of the wholesale game. Sometimes you may need to, I've had people who have had a custom product and have come up with a specific product line for wholesale where it's kind of really the same as their customized product but just more standardized. So that may be a possibility as well. Is it cost effective for you to produce in volume? You want to think about how long does your production process take and what costs are there? You know, is it going to cost, you know, a lot in labor to be able to get this kind of volume done in a timely manner? You know, if you're working on products that maybe have a multi-step process and there's big gaps in between going from one part of the process to the other, you know, maybe that's going to be harder to work around. So you really want to evaluate that. And I always tell people to kind of think in what ifs. What if I got an order of 50? How would I handle that? What if I got an order of 100? How would I handle that? And the other trick to this is also knowing what your maximum capacity is. If you know that you can produce, you know, 100 of your items in, you know, a week, then you want to keep that in mind as you're taking orders and not overextend yourself. And then also thinking about, do you have sufficient access to materials and supplies? If you're working with something very specialized or kind of unique, you know, you want to make sure that you have access to it. Will your suppliers be able to get you the amount of, you know, raw materials and supplies that you're going to need? And if the suppliers that you're currently working with are able to do that, you might have to see if there are other suppliers that you can work with to get the things that you need. You also have to think about whether your product is saleable or not. And being saleable in retail doesn't always mean that it's going to be saleable as a wholesale item. So what you want to do is kind of start looking at what items in your collection are the most popular at retail. And sticking to those items. Don't try to wholesale things that you weren't able to move yourself at retail. You know, I've had some people that have approached wholesale as saying, okay, you know, I can sell this at a show really easily, or I can sell this in my store really easily, but these items I just have a hard time moving, so maybe I'll wholesale those and let someone else worry about it. Well, if you're not able to sell that product in a store or at a retail show yourself, chances are a wholesaler is not going to have an easy time selling that product either. So don't think of wholesale as a place to kind of just, you know, send off your less performing items. You want to make sure that it's something that's going to move. You also want to think about, is this a product that's going to be easy and convenient for retailers to bring into their stores? Are they going to be able to merchandise it, you know, correctly or in a way that's going to sell it? Are they going to be able to display it easily? Is it something that's, you know, going to require a lot of space? Is it something that is going to require a special, you know, type of display unit? And if that's the case, you might want to consider supplying it. But you don't want to be making a lot of extra work for the retailer. If they get your product and it's hard for them to incorporate with their store or with their current layout, then you're really going to have trouble getting them to reorder. The other thing you want to do is look for cohesiveness. You really kind of want to try to consolidate your product line so that it all fits together. And this is something that I think is a little bit different than doing retail shows, because when you go to a retail show, you can kind of have a more diverse selection of product, and you might have, you know, like wine bottle cheese cutters over here and then handmade pot holders over here, and although they're kind of related, it's diverse. You want to be thinking about, you know, what your brand is. How do the products fit in with your brand? Because what's going to happen is when those products are on the shelves at a retailer, that becomes your brand. It's no longer you talking to the customer one-on-one. It's no longer you at a show where people are walking by. The product really has to stand for itself once it's in a retail establishment that's not your own. So you want to think about, do all of these things kind of tie together? And if you think about when you're shopping for, you know, as a consumer, when you're shopping for, you know, products in a retail setting, especially handmade or handcrafted types of things, the people that have multiple things in their product line, you can usually see how they relate. They have a common theme, or they may have a common design element, or they may have a common, you know, usage. But there's something there that ties it all together that makes it recognizable as a product line. The other thing I think that I would caution you about is not deciding to go into wholesale just because you know, it seems like there might be an opportunity. you really want to stick with your core business. I've had people that have, had a core business in one area and say, oh, there's a great opportunity to wholesale, XYZ, completely unrelated to what they're doing. And unless you want to start a new business, I don't recommend that. You really want to stick to what you do best. And sometimes it's a hard decision to make, because when you see an opportunity, and especially if it could be a lucrative one, you really want to go for it. But if it's not your core business, it's not your area of expertise, it's something that's new to you or that you're not quite as comfortable with, you really want to make sure that you're able to, deliver something of value and stand behind it. So, and I usually tell most people that in most cases, you're not going to start out as a wholesaler, because you really need to have your product well developed and kind of time tested before a retailer is going to want to purchase it. So I just wanted to go and show you, before I start the rest of the things we're going to talk about here. Lauren provided this really awesome document about wholesale terms, a really great glossary of different things that you're going to hear tonight, but then also at the show when you go, that, if you haven't heard those words before, you want to make sure that you know what they are. And some of them are things that are kind of common and have all been heard, but others are different. So, back orders, consignment, understanding what consignment is, drop shipping, exclusivity, what a house account is, keystone pricing we talked about, what is a line sheet. So some of these things we're going to cover later on. And some of these things you may encounter, and you'll have this as a reference to say, oh, I heard somebody say something about this. What is that? And you'll have something to kind of refer to. So are there any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Okay. So now we're going to start talking about how to get ready to be a wholesaler. So let's say, you've kind of gone through all of these things. You've looked at your pricing. We've evaluated all that. You've worked with your advisor. And you've made the decision, yes, I'm going to wholesale, and I've got products that are going to fit, and I think this is going to be a good opportunity for me. So once that happens, and you want to kind of get into preparation mode and start thinking about, how am I going to get ready to do this, and what am I going to need to be an effective wholesaler? So the first thing you want to think about, just like with any business startup or with any new product line or new product in general, is market research. And that's really, thinking about knowing who your customer base is and who's going to buy it. So, when you start your business and you're selling retail, your market is a consumer, an end consumer, a person who's making a purchase, as an individual person for their own personal use. Now your market research is going to be a little bit different, because your target customer is a retail establishment. It may be a retail store, it may be a chain, it may be a boutique. It could perhaps be someone who's doing a website that sells local items. It could be any number of people who are reselling your product. So now you have to be thinking in those terms. So one thing I think that's always good in market research is to ask questions and to network. You get some of the best advice and the best information from talking to other producers, and even from your own customers, and getting feedback and knowing what people are looking for and what their experiences have been. You also want to take a look at what are other producers' relationships with retailers? What stores do you typically see other producers in? And you want to be careful that you don't, necessarily go after the same, wholesale accounts that your competitors have. But you kind of want to be looking for what types of stores and what types of retail establishments are going to fit well with your product. So, if I make, custom designed skateboards, I'm probably not going to be selling them in a place that sells, maybe fine household items. So you want to make sure that the product you have has a fit with the retailers that are out there, and finding the ones that fit with what you're doing. When you're looking at retailers, think about what other designers and producers are doing out there to fit in with these retailers, and if it's similar to what you're doing. So again, going out there and looking at different stores and boutiques and chains, websites of retailers if you're working with someone online, just being aware of the landscape and knowing what else is out there and seeing where you can fit in. Kind of doing that on-site research yourself. Something to think about is try to target retailers that have a high traffic and they can move your merchandise quickly. So, if it's a brick and mortar store, someplace where there's a lot of foot traffic or, a lot of access to maybe tourists or travelers or local people making regular purchases. If it's a website, you want to kind of know a little bit about their website performance, how many people make purchases, what kind of activity do they have on their site, those kinds of things. You also want to make sure that you're getting retailers who are paying their vendors on time, because you want to get paid on time and not be waiting. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more, but you definitely want to get references from new accounts to make sure that they're good for what they're selling, and or better yet, get paid ahead. And again, we'll talk about this later on. Some retailers might ask for exclusivity, which means they only want you to sell to them in a particular city or town or region. You really want to think about that before you agree to it, and even before the question comes up with a retailer, really. Knowing, is this something that you can really afford to do, and it's really going to rely on the amount of volume and the consistency that they're going to do. And thinking really long and hard about, if you want to be cutting out other retailers, to favor one. In some cases it may work, but you really want to be careful of not cutting yourself off too much, and it's going to depend a lot on the market. So these are all the pieces of pricing that we, talked about and went over. And so, you're kind of familiar with this. You've got your cost of goods, which is basically your raw materials, your labor cost, your overhead, and then your profit. So I just kind of wanted to review that before we kind of went into talking about the pricing. And also, I'm kind of going through this to make sure that you've considered everything that needs to be in there. So again, cost of goods would be your materials, your supplies, all the parts that go into making the end product. So if I'm, making a coat, then the material, the lining, the thread, the buttons, the interfacing, all of those things are going to be part of the cost of goods, including labor, yours, and also anything that may be outsourced, or employees. Your overhead. One thing that I didn't talk about before that I want to point out with overhead is that most of your overhead is going to be fixed, but you do have some variable overhead. Those are overhead expenses that could fluctuate with the amount of business that you do. So one of those things might be credit card fees. Obviously, the more sales you have, the more those fees are going to be. So you want to make sure that you're accounting for those costs, so that as your sales go up, you're generating enough to pay those expenses. And then profit is what's left over after everything else is paid. You cover your materials and supplies, you cover your labor, you pay for your overhead, and then everything that's left over. That's what allows you to reinvest in the business and grow the business. And it gives you a cash cushion. It helps to build your cash flow. So a lot of people think of profit as the piece of the business that they pay themselves from. What you really want to do is make sure that you're paying yourself from here, from the labor. That's where your pay should be coming from as a producer. The profit is what's going to go back into your business. And I think a lot of people sometimes, get that mixed up. Not to say that you can't draw from your profit for personal income. You can certainly do that, but you want to make sure that there's enough to, invest in your business and, keep it going on the path that you've decided to follow with it. So while we're talking about pricing, just a few more things to keep in mind. Think about what price the market will support. What are the end users going to be willing to pay, the consumer? Take a look at similar products that are out there already, or similar product lines. How does your pricing compare? And I'm not saying that you should match your competitors' prices, but you want to be aware of how you line up with them. Your price may very well be higher, but that may be because you have a higher quality product or use higher quality ingredients. Maybe your product is a little less expensive, but you do some things to cut costs to keep it cost effective for your customers. Whatever the case is, you want to know where you stand in that pricing comparison, because that's a question that someone may ask you at a wholesale show. Is ABC booth down the road sells those candles and they seem the same, but they cost twice as much. Why is that? Or vice versa. And you want to be able to explain that. And you want to think about not just bricks and mortar, but competitors that are online and competitors that you have at different shows. You want to think about the image that your pricing is going to project to the consumer. The general tendency is that if we're paying a higher price, we expect higher quality. And typically, when a consumer is paying a lower price, their expectations of quality are much lower. And sometimes that can work against you. A lot of people I hear often say, I want to have the best price. Sometimes that's not the best strategy, because sometimes the lowest price doesn't have value with the customers. And they might say, well, I'm not going to buy that because it's so cheap, because I'm not sure if it's going to do what I want it to do or do what they say it's going to do. So you have to kind of be careful of that. And again, that ties back to that market research and thinking about how are your customers viewing your product and what their needs are in that target market. And then also, again, thinking about your retailers. How much money do they need to make? Are they going to be able to make the profit that they need by selling my items? So there are a few things that you can kind of have ready ahead of time, and that you should have ready ahead of time. Some different tools and documents that you can have that will help you manage your wholesale realm of business if you decide to go that route. And the first of those is you want to establish your wholesale terms and policies. Now, this is one thing that's different from a retail sale, because with retail, you have a product, you put a price on it, you set it on the table, or you set it on the shelf, and people come buy it, and they either buy it or they don't, and they walk away with it. With wholesale, that's different, because lots of times people are placing orders and taking, delivery on things later. They're buying in volume. There's a lot of other different factors that go into this transaction. So here are some things that you want to think about including in your wholesale terms. One of those is you might think about having a minimum order, either in dollars or a number of items. That makes sure, first of all, that your items are going to have enough shelf space in a store to draw attention. If you sell a very small product and someone buys 3 or 4 of them, chances are they're going to get lost in a store setting. It also discourages people who just want to buy something to get the wholesale price. I don't think we encounter that a lot at these shows, but you want to make sure that you're not encouraging that. You can set a minimum initial order, and then that might be larger than other orders. You can set, after the first order, your minimum is 50 as opposed to 100. One thing that does is, make sure that you're getting a minimum order that's going to be satisfactory to you, and that the retailer is getting enough that they have, a good level of inventory. And then as the minimum order goes down, they're kind of just replenishing. So that might be something, and then that is a little more attractive to the retailer. You're going to want to have your payment terms spelled out and how you're going to handle that. And this is a document that you'll be able to give to everybody as they're placing orders or thinking of placing orders. The best thing is to require payment before you ship on all orders. I know we talked a minute ago about making sure that your vendors or your retailers pay their vendors. A good way to have that not even be an issue is to make sure that that payment is processed before you ship. And so what you might do is at the show you take their their payment information, or you have them, pay you at the show, or, they pay you by check or something at a later date. If they give you credit card information, you can charge them before the order ships. But you want to make sure that you have a way for collecting on payment before that order gets in their hands to make sure that you've been paid. You want to make sure that they're aware of what types of payment are accepted. Will you accept checks? Will you accept cash? Will you accept credit cards? They want to know how they can pay you, and you want to make sure that there's agreement of how that's going to happen beforehand. After that initial order, if you want, you can start offering net 30 terms, which means you give your customers 30 days to pay. So you send them a bill when there's shipment. At this point, if you decide to extend credit to these retailers who are buying your products, you want to make sure that you do a credit check and get some credit references. And we can talk about that. That's a whole other separate issue about how to do that, but it's really not difficult, and it protects you. You want to make sure that this is someone who's got a good payment history, and is, you're not going to be caught sending out product and not getting paid. So some other things to include in your wholesale terms and policy is shipping. How is that going to be handled? Are you going to charge a flat rate? Is it going to be done by weight? Is it going to be done by shipping zip code? Do you have a preference for who you will use for shipping? Will it be UPS or the post office or FedEx? Or can you let the customer choose? That all has to be spelled out so that they know ahead of time how the shipping is going to occur. Have some policies about returns. Will you take returns? If you have a retailer that comes back and says, hey, I bought 50 of these knit hats and only 25 of them sold, will you take the other 25 back? Think about if you're going to do that or not, or give them a reimbursement or maybe a portion of it. And if you do decide that you're going to do returns, what would be the conditions that you set? You want to have the stuff be back in new condition. Is there a certain time frame? Any other things that you would want to factor in? You also want to think about how you'll handle damages. If you have something that's been shipped to someone, and it arrives damaged or broken, how are you going to deal with that? Will you cover the cost? Will you have insurance? Making sure that that's set out with them beforehand. And then other things you might want to consider is, what are your policies if someone decides they want to cancel an order? Will they be charged a fee? Do you have a certain time frame that has to happen? And again, this is going to depend on your production process and how customized your products are. Do you have a display policy? Is there a certain way that you want your products displayed? Do you want to require that they display it in the display cases that you provide? Do you have minimum retail pricing that you set? Are you going to give discounts for volumes? There's all kinds of different things that you can include in your policies. I would say, you can just Google things and see what's out there for sample, wholesale terms and policies, and kind of pull things that you like or change things that you don't like. And I do see we have a question here. And I think that this is true, and if not, you can let me know, Lauren. It says, I know it was mentioned that we would be getting a list of stores to touch base with them prior to the show. This would really help. And I think, Lauren, that you do that, if I'm correct. If not, hop in and correct me. And I'm going to talk about that also, how to handle that if you get that type of information beforehand.
Yeah, I can answer that. So yes, we will send out a list of stores. I usually wait until a bit closer to the show, probably around 2 weeks out, just so we have as complete a list as we can. Just so you all know, that will come in PDF form, and I do that on purpose so that not every single buyer gets 85 emails from all the vendors. So you will be able to choose who you want to email and specifically send an email out from that list to those people if you want to let them know about your show special or anything like that. I think that's a really great idea.
Awesome. So some other things that you're going to want to have to help you, sell at the show and also to manage what you're doing. One of those is a line sheet. And that is basically a document that includes just important information for buyers. It's kind of almost like a mini catalog of, the stuff that you have available at the show. So it would include things like item numbers for each of the products that you're offering, a description of each item, pictures or drawings or some kind of representation if that's feasible for what you're doing. If there are different options that they can select, like different sizes, colors, materials, then that would be on there. You would want to make sure that if you have, like let's say one knit hat and it comes in 5 colors, that you would have a separate item number for each color when you get ready to fill the order. That will really help you out, and then it also helps out with tracking the orders. Then obviously your wholesale price. MSRP stands for manufacturer's suggested retail price, so that would be the price that you would recommend. You don't necessarily have to include that. It doesn't require that the retailer follows that, but if you think it's important to kind of give them an idea of what the product would sell for, you can do that. I think most of them have a feel for it already. And then whatever your payment terms are. The main thing to remember about your line sheet is you want to make sure it's very easy to read, very clean, very concise. Not just enough detail to give them the information they need, but not so much detail that it's overwhelming and they have to fish through to find what they need. So I've got a few examples here. Excuse me. And again, I'll send these documents out to you afterwards. And I just kind of pulled these samples to look at. So this one is for a t-shirt company. You can see here, I just love the layout of it and the simplicity. You can clearly see what the product is. Underneath it, you'll see a description, an item number, the pricing. There's a recommended retail here, the colors that it comes in, what the materials are that it's made of, and all of the sizes. Up here are their sales terms. Providing this dating here will help if you change your products at different points in times. This is another example. This has kind of like line drawings of each item and the different colors that they come in with the same descriptions. So you can see this can be very individualized by the type of product that you're selling. This is one for soaps. I would recommend that if you're developing a line sheet, go out there and Google some. If you make soap, Google soap company line sheet or something like that, and see what else is out there. Don't reinvent the wheel. Take a look at what some of the ideas are there. Excuse me. And you want to make sure, that you're able to create something that's unique. You're not copying someone, but that you're using things that have, that have been tried and tested. The other thing that's important is really clear images. These are, nice professional images. You can hire someone to do it for you, or there's probably some tips that Lauren or some other people could offer you in getting really good photography done. Remind me to tell you about our e-commerce services as well. That'll be part of what I want to talk about before we're done. This particular one is a little bit different. You'll see that they've got their pricing here, pictures of just some of the finished product, but then their labels, so you can get an idea of what the other seasonings are. Excuse me. And some other, examples of different types of products. This one actually has the barcode on it, so if you have barcodes, that might be helpful to include. The other thing to remember is to make sure that your contact information is on everything that you're giving out to the vendors, whether it's your wholesale policies, whether it's your line sheet. You'll see here there's contact address, phone number, website, making sure that people are able to reach you. And it seems like a no-brainer, but you wouldn't believe how many times those things get forgotten because you're concentrating on the content and you forget to add those little things. So you want to make sure that you do that. Lauren also pointed out too that she's had some people who have listed their wholesale pricing on their line sheet and had a notation that the pricing is valid until a certain date, because you don't want to have someone come back to you, a year later with an outdated line sheet trying to order. What I've seen some people do is do a line sheet like this, and then you'll see here, this one, yeah. This one doesn't have any prices on it, but they might have an accompanying page that would say this item number is this price. So then you can do a really nice, line sheet like this, which is really nice color and nice images, and then not have to redo it, because this, if you're not doing it yourself, could be expensive to have printed. And even if you are printing it yourself, it can be expensive too. So as your prices change, you're not having to ditch the whole document. You can just slide the new pricing sheet in there. So that's okay to do as well. And like I said, the biggest thing is for it to be easy to read so that people can, quickly get the information that they want. So just a few more things that you're going to want to think about when you're getting ready to be at the wholesale show, and things that you're going to want to include. An order form. These are really simple to create. You can order them if you want to from a business supply store, stationery store, Office Max or something like that, or a local printer. You can make your own. If you just go to, like, a lot of Microsoft programs have templates for these things. I found, a few in Word. The documents that I included here as samples are from Word. So your order form, you want to make sure includes an order number or a purchase number. This is really important. I was just working with someone a couple weeks ago, and we were putting together some information, and we had to pull some invoices. And he had created his invoices in, I think, maybe Word or something like that. But he never changed the order number, so we had like 5 invoices that were invoice number 3. And so as we were trying to track them and account for the shipping and things like that, it was like, okay, invoice number 3, oh, we can't go by 3 because there's 5 number 3s. So it just really helps you with tracking to make sure that the order form, when we get to the invoice part, that there's a match there. You want to make sure that you have the buyer's name and contact information there, along with their shipping and billing address. Obviously they can fill that in for you, but you want to make sure that that gets put on the order form so that you have all of that if there's a question. And then also, obviously, for when you're ready to ship, you have the address. Their payment information. Whether it's, we'll pay by check by a certain date, or if they paid you that day. If you're taking credit card information, that information would go on there. You want to make sure that you're being very cognizant of security issues. Talk to your credit card processing provider. We could do a whole other workshop on how to make sure that you're keeping your customers' information safe. So make sure that you're doing that. Don't leave that stuff just laying around for anybody to have. If you're storing it digitally at your location, there are things you're going to want to make sure that you do to make sure that that information is secure as well. You would want to include on the order form the estimated shipping date, and then there would be duplicate copies, because obviously the customer wants this information as well in case they have a question or there's a dispute. So you can have duplicates printed, or you can order them, or you can make your own form and just use carbon paper. Some people do that. I think you can still buy carbon paper. Certainly there's ways that you can do that to make sure that there are multiple copies for you and your customer. If you have a computer and a printer on site, you can do it that way. And then an invoice. And so the difference here is the order form is what tells you what they want. What products are they going to buy? How are they going to pay for it? When is it going to get shipped? Where is it going to go? The invoice is what your customer will actually pay from. And so you want to make sure that you have these labeled and they have the appearances a little bit different, so that it's clear that the invoice is the invoice. This is what you have to pay when the customer gets it. Again, you can create your own. And again, I didn't mention this with the order form, but with the invoice, I know for sure you can use QuickBooks to create invoices if you're using QuickBooks, so that's a nice feature that they have. Be sure you label it as an invoice, include your contact information as well as the customer's, and again, make sure you're spelling out the payment terms so that when they get the invoice, they know exactly how much time they have to pay, what are the acceptable methods of payment, what happens if they don't pay on time, those types of things. Excuse me. And the other thing that you really want to make sure of when you're sending that invoice is that you send it separately from the order. So when you box up the order or you stick it in an envelope or however you're shipping it to your customer, send the invoice under separate cover for a couple of reasons. Number one is someone at the receiving end may not necessarily be the store owner. It might just be an employee that's opening up the boxes that come in off the truck, and they just open it up and they take the stuff and they put it on the shelf and they throw everything away. It could easily get lost. So, you know, sometimes that just happens. If the invoice is in a separate cover, then, you know, it's going to get more attention. It's going to have its own, you know, standout. And they can be sent at the same time. You just want to make sure that they're separated. I wanted to show you the sample invoice too. And so you'll find this when I send you the documents after. You'll find this included with this list of wholesale terms. You can only attach so many documents, so I had to kind of squish a few together. So this is a sample invoice. You'll see here your company information up at the top. There's an invoice number, the customer information, who it's billed to, address, phone number, contact. If the shipping is different, who it gets shipped to would be over here. When the payment's due, if there's a salesperson involved, who that is, what the payment terms are, delivery date, how it's going to be shipped. All of these things you agree on when the person places the order. And then down here, you know, filling out what the order is, how many, what quantity, what the item number is, description, you know, the price per unit. If you're offering a discount, maybe a discount at a certain show, or they have a, you know, a credit or something like that, and then what their total is. And then sales tax really wouldn't apply if you're selling wholesale. You should be getting a wholesale certificate from the customer that shows that they're going to collect sales tax on their end. So you would, you know, either just take that line out of yours or, you know, put NA there or whatever. And so you want a copy of this so you can fill the order, but you also want the customer to have a copy of this so that they have it for their records and they remember what they ordered and they remember what the terms are. And then here is a sales order. And this is the one that you would fill out. I'm sorry, I did that backwards. This is the invoice that you would send to get paid. So all of that information would be totaled there. And then this is the one that would be filled out at the show or shortly thereafter. And again, it's very much the same information, a little bit of a different format. But again, this gives them an idea of what, you know, what they're expecting from you. I would include your payment terms on here too, maybe, or give them a copy of that wholesale policies so they've got that with their sales order so they know what they're agreeing to. Questions, so I'll go and get these. So this question is says, oops, let me go back to the beginning, make sure I get it. Calculating your price by how many hours going to making a single item doesn't cover any of the other time spent on your business. In the case of a solo entrepreneur, a lot of time is spent doing other tasks other than making items. How do you suggest you close that gap? That could be covered in the overhead, perhaps. One thing I tell people to do, an auto garage is a good example of this, and I know none of you are even really close to being an auto garage, but in terms of time and work, it's very similar. So when I talk with someone who's starting an auto repair shop, we sit down and we take a look at what their hourly rate is, and pricing on parts is fairly easy because you can get that. It's really concrete. But kind of, looking at their pricing in terms of hourly rate is different. So, a lot of times we'll sit down and say, okay, what is the hourly rate that you think you'll command in your market? And they'll say, whatever, maybe $80 an hour. And so then when we start thinking about, okay, how many hours a day, are you actually going to produce? And they say, well, I'm open 9 hours a day. So, 9 times $80 is what would come in. And I always put the brakes on right there and say, well, wait a minute. You actually spend 9 hours of actual labor on cars throughout the day. It's probably not true because you're answering the phone. You probably take a lunch break at some point. You may have to run and go pick up parts. And just not everybody's going to produce a full 8 hours of work a day. So what I tell them is, if you're going to produce, say, 8 or maybe 6 hours of actual labor in an 8-hour day, you want to make sure that that cost gets spread out over those extra 2 hours. So that's one way to approach it, is to kind of average out those hours and say every hour I need to bring in X amount of dollars. The other way is that can kind of come from that profit piece. If you have your hourly labor rate in there, that kind of pays you for your actual your work, your crafting, your producing, and then your goal may be to have a certain amount of profit every week or every month that you draw from to supplement that to pay the other part of your time. So the key is that you want to make sure that there's also some profit left over to reinvest in the business. But that part of that profit can be for your individual reimbursement as well for that additional time. So does that make sense? Any other questions, as long as we kind of paused a little bit here? Okay, good. I hope I'm not taking too long to get to your questions, because I'm kind of looking at 3 or 4 different things here. So sometimes I'm like, oh, I wonder how long that question's been up there. Well, I'll get to them all. So some other things to think about having, ready for when you're going to your show is having a catalog. And I've got some samples that we'll go to in a minute. A catalog has more detail than a line sheet, more detailed descriptions, probably some really high quality photos, nice maybe glossy paper, kind of more detailed and prettier basically. Typically you won't include prices in your catalog, mainly because they're expensive to print and you don't want to keep reprinting them every time you change prices. You might be able to use the same catalog for wholesale and retail if you're not including the prices. You can just vary which price sheet you include with it. So you're probably not going to give out as many catalogs as you will line sheets. The catalog at a wholesale show is really going to be used more for people who are maybe looking for, yeah, here are some things that I want to purchase from your line, but I'm really looking to maybe expand it to some other things as well. Kind of food for thought for later on. You want to have business cards, obviously. Make sure that you have plenty of them. Make sure that they're well designed and they look professional. There are all kinds of help and assistance you can get out there. I just actually did a webinar through SCORE, which is Service Corps of Retired Executives. It's an SBA program that talked about how to design a good business card. So there are a lot of good tips through there. All kinds of information you can find online, or again, meet with someone here at the SBDC or with Lauren and get help with that. One thing I would recommend with a business card is make sure that it's a standard size. Don't get something that's like extra big or oddly shaped, that it doesn't fit well. If someone's carrying around 3 or 4, a handful of cards from the show, that there's this one that's always kind of getting in the way. It's just a personal pet peeve of mine, but I think sometimes it can be annoying to people. And you don't want your potential purchasers to be annoyed. And just a little side note on branding, and we could definitely do a whole nother session or 2 or 3 or 4 on branding, so I'm just going to touch on it today. But the idea is that you want a clear and consistent image and vision of what your business is and what your products are to the customers. So that includes, using a consistent business name. When you're choosing your business name, think about how that reflects to the customers. Being consistent with your logo, with your color scheme, having a uniform, recognizable look, and that may be, just in your decor or the colors that you're using in your booth. It may be how you're dressed. It may be uniforms. It could be any number of things, but making sure that there's some consistency in what you're doing so that people recognize right away. And if you think of the big brand names that there's certain things with the brand. McDonald's is, the obvious one. The Golden Arches is very familiar. The design of the stores, the color schemes, all of those things are very similar. That's part of their brand. So here are a few examples of wholesale catalogs, and some of these may take a little while to pop up, so we might end up just looking at a couple. And you'll be able to, I'll send these slides out too, so you'll be able to access these after the fact and get a look at them as well. And again, look at some of the things that are out there and see what you'd like, see what things you'd like to incorporate. I would really strongly encourage you, unless you have design background, to work with a professional designer on your catalog. If you can't do it initially, maybe even work on it with a designer, maybe just on the cover or just on a few pages, but try to get as professional a look as you can. As you can see here, this sample is actually from the site of the designer, so they're just kind of showing the pages, but it's, great picture quality, beautiful graphics, nice color scheme. The nice thing that you can see here is there are, this is obviously a linens seller, so you can see, nice detailed pictures of the designs and what they look like. These, where you can see the different patterns and the different colors and how they go together. Really good representations of color. Something you want to think about is if you're producing an item that has multiple colors, and the color is going to be very important. So things like this, where it's maybe home decor or design related things, use someone who can do photography and web design that will get pretty accurate representations of your colors. Have some samples on hand at the show that you can show people. One thing that can really be harmful is if people look at this and order something and they think is red and it comes to them and it's orange. You want to make sure that you're able to communicate to people what your color is accurately. I think I'm going to do this one. Oh, actually, that's not the one I wanted to do. Hopefully it opens soon. Oh, here it comes. This one, again, another one where you can see great photographs here. Obviously they sell throw pillows with these really awesome designs. All the pricing is here. I would bet that there's probably another page that kind of gives more detail about the types of fabric that's used and the measurements and things like that with more detail. But with this product, you can see that the image, the representation is really important, that people are able to see this well. So this photography, is really doing what they need it to do. And let's look at one more. Try this one. patiently waiting. I have faith that it will open. Maybe not. We might be pushing the limits here of what capacity I have. So you will have those to access. I'll send those out to you afterwards. But there are some really great catalog examples. So, you can certainly look at those. And like I said, Google some things. Burt's Bees has a really nice wholesale catalog. I think one of those links was actually from there. So there's lots of samples out there that you can take a look at. So do we have any questions about wholesale preparation before I kind of move into actually getting ready for the show? Okay, doesn't look like we have any more. So getting ready for the show, there's some things you can do ahead of time to kind of, make the show the most effective for you and be ready to hopefully sell a whole lot of stuff to some retailers. So first of all, you want to make sure that you know as much as possible about the show beforehand. What kind of show is it? Is it the type of show where retailers are going to place orders, or is it cash and carry where they can buy things and leave, or is it a combination of both? My understanding is that the Buyer's Day show in Saratoga is a combination of both, so you do want to be prepared to be selling some items for people to take away. You want to know how much space you're going to be provided in your booth and what things are included. What is the size of the booth? Are you going to get a table? Are you going to get a tablecloth? Is it a pipe and drape setup? Do you get hard walls, chairs, lighting, electricity? Knowing the scheduling of when you can set up and when you have to tear down. If you have 2 hours to set up and you've got a booth that takes 4 hours to set up, you could be in trouble. So you want to kind of be aware of those things so you can plan for being able to not be caught unawares when you get there to set up. And Lauren, I think you'll be sending that information out to people with a packet of information to get ready. Is that correct?
Sorry, yes, everybody should have that information. If you need it still, or if you lost it, just let me know and I'm happy to resend that to you.
Great, thanks. So thinking about, getting ready for the show and some of the things you want to bring, you definitely want to bring some product samples. Besides the things that you're selling, you want to make sure that you have some things that people can take a look at if they're going to order at least one of every item from the line that you plan to sell at the show. Might be a good idea to have some backups just in case something happens. Some wholesale packets, which would include catalog, line sheet, your order forms, all of the information that if someone says, hey, I really love this stuff and I'd like to place an order, that you're going to need to give them. Or if they say, I really love this stuff and I can't place an order today, but I really want to get back in touch with you maybe next season, you want to have something that's ready to go for them and be able to go through and show it to them. Clipboards might be a good idea, if you're taking orders on the fly. Gives people, something to write on a hard surface, just makes it a little bit easier, especially if you've got a crowded booth. I always suggest that any show, whether it's wholesale or retail, you have some way to collect information for your bulk email list. So, having people sign up, whether it's maybe through a drawing or just through a form that's on the table, if you'd like to receive our newsletter, if you'd like to get updates about sales and specials, but definitely use this opportunity to catch anybody that has some interest so that you can contact them later, whether or not they're ordering that day. You'll also want to think about bringing maybe some miscellaneous tools and supplies that you might need for kind of little last-minute things. Maybe pins, maybe a hammer, screwdriver, tape, paper, pens, cleaning supplies, those kinds of things, that you just might encounter mishaps, or who knows what could happen while you're setting up. And then the things you need for your booth design, you may be bringing, display fixtures, signage, tablecloths, whatever. I usually encourage people to make a packing list of all the things that they need for, each show. There's, probably a standard, list of things that will go to just about every show with you. So create that list, hone it down after a few times so that you know what you need to have. And then every time you get ready for a show, you just go through the list, check it off, make sure you have it. I have some people that actually kind of have a kit put together, maybe one of those Rubbermaid bins or something that has everything that they always take, and that's there. And when they get back from a show, it all goes in there. And when they go to the next show, it's all there ready for them. But have some kind of system so that you're not without something that you need later on. To whatever extent you can, you want to try to research the buyers who are attending. You'll have a list of who those people are, as Lauren just said. Learn as much about them as you can. Look at their websites. If you have time, visit their stores. Find out what types of products they're selling, what type of atmosphere they have. Just knowing who are the ones that you're fitting in, and think about the targets that you have. If there's time, or if you're able to, you might be able to do a pre-show email or a mailer to those people to say, hey, come check us out at booth number XYZ. If you show us this card or this email, we'll give you, a special gift or 5% off your first order, or something like that. You might want to think about making a show special that'll encourage orders, or maybe encourage cash sales, whatever you want to promote. So it could be a percentage off, it could be some additional items, whatever it might be that would help to generate sales. Practice your elevator pitch. Have a short kind of spiel that you give people to explain what it is that your business does and how you do it. They can see your products, but something that you can tell them that helps them understand a little bit about what you do and how you do it. And for those of you that aren't familiar, your elevator pitch is kind of a way of coming up with this short statement or this short explanation. And the idea is that you imagine that you were stepping onto an elevator with someone and you're going up one floor in that elevator together. And the person turns to you and asks, what is it that you do? Or what is your business? You want to be able to explain that to them and have them understand it and the time it takes you to get from one floor to the next. So it's very short and very understandable. And making sure that you're able to convey to people what it is that you're doing. Also, being very familiar with your product features and benefits and knowing your key selling points. And product features are kind of the physical attributes of your product. So if I'm thinking of a lamp, the physical attributes might be it's made of wood, it has an LED light, it has a pull switch, it has a retractable cord. Those are the things that tell you what the product is, what it looks like, what it does, all of the functional pieces. The benefits are, how does this product help the customer, or how does it make their life better, or give them some sort of good feeling or whatever. So the benefits for the lamp might be, reduces eye strain. It might be, the LED bulb lasts a long time. The retractable cord, prevents you from knocking it over or tripping. Those are the things that the customer is really interested in. They need to know the features because they need to know what they're buying, but what they're really basing their decision to purchase on is benefits. What can this offer me as a consumer, or in this case, for a retailer, what can this offer my customers as a consumer? So you kind of want to be thinking about your products in those ways because that's really what sells. Another thing you want to give some thought to before you get to a show is your booth design. And thinking about how you're going to lay your booth out, what it will look like, how you're going to display things. Something to remember is the 2-foot rule, trying to keep the most interesting items within 2 feet of the aisle, because that's where passersby, especially at a really busy show, are going to look first, and that's what's going to catch their eye first. The back wall of your booth, or the back side of your booth, is still important, but that's not the part that's going to get their attention initially. So you want to see what you can do to draw people's attention from the aisle as quickly as possible. You want to think about your branding, and again, keeping your appearance consistent and in keeping with your branding, making sure that your booth looks like the type of business that you are, and that it matches your philosophy and your your atmosphere. Use consistent colors, use your logo, designs that kind of have the same style, consistent signage, and even sometimes maybe in the way that you dress. One really effective way to draw attention to your booth at any show, wholesale or retail, is to have a way to demonstrate your products. Now, not everything is really conducive to demonstrating. So if I have, let's say, an ice cream making machine, I can demonstrate that pretty easily. I can have one set up on my table. I can have all the ingredients there. I can make the ice cream. I can let people sample it. That's easy. If you sell jewelry, that might be a little harder to demonstrate. Depending on the show and what kinds of time frame there is and what kinds of foot traffic you have, you might want to demonstrate how you make some of it. Maybe having a video running of your production process, providing some samples, if you have a food product, or maybe color swatches or color charts if you have something that's made of material. The other thing that's really important in a wholesale setting is to try to showcase your products in a way that the retailer can see how they would be designed in their store, or how they would be displayed in their store. So maybe have something that looks similar to what a rack would typically look like, or a shelf would typically look like in a store, so that people can see for their own eyes, oh, I can envision that being right in that back corner of my store, or right up front by the door, or wherever. You also want to think about having clear communication with your booth. Make sure that your pricing is clear. If you're pricing things, there for people to see, you want to make sure that those signs are very clear. You want to have clear information about the materials that you're using, your ingredients, the information on your tag, your signage, your packaging. All should be very clear. And again, signage, packaging, tags, all of those things need to have your contact information on them, at least a website or a phone number. Think about lighting and making sure that you have sufficient lighting, particularly if you have something that's very small. You want to maybe highlight different areas of your table with some spotlighting, maybe using a table lamp or something like that. If you have something, like particularly for jewelry, lighting is important. If you have something sparkly or shiny, you want to make sure that you really try to highlight that with some good lighting, those kinds of things. If you have enough space, and again, this will depend on the show and the venue, if you have enough space in your booth, try to create an area where you could sit with buyers potentially. Maybe it's just a couple of chairs, it might be a tiny table in the back, but somewhere where you could sit down, especially if there's more than one of you at the booth. If you've got someone kind of talking to people and someone wants to place an order, the other person can take them to the back and start working on the order and have some conversation about what they're looking for, and kind of hashing out terms and things like that. So if you can accommodate that, that's a nice little touch to have. And then also try to remember to have some space where you can store your personal stuff out of the way. It might be, maybe just in a bin underneath your table, covered by a tablecloth. Things like your coat and your purse, so they're not just hanging over the back of a chair. You can keep your space looking nice and neat. You might have extra product or extra marketing materials. If those can be stored there, or even if they're stored like in a car and you have to make a run later on to go get them or whatever. Particularly if you have help with you, then that could be effective too. But you want to avoid, just having a booth that's just overpiled with stuff. You want to keep the focus on the products so that people can focus on those. So I've got a few slides with some pictures to kind of give you some examples of some of the things I'm talking about. A lot of these these pictures are from shows that are, you know, probably much larger and very different than what you're going to be seeing, you know, from the buyer days or any other shows that you're going to do in the area. But the general idea is here, so you can kind of get what we're talking about. So this first one is for the 2-foot rule. You can see here, you know, there's some stuff in the back of the booth, but the details and the stuff that's really going to draw people in are right up here in the front of the booth. You know, obviously this isn't something you can do at every show, depending on how much space you have or where you are, but there's definitely something here that's close to the aisle to draw a customer in. This is another one, again, you know, these items that are right out by the front. It looks like they're selling, you know, some kind of textile designs and aprons or something to that effect. So some of those designs are right up in the front where people can see them. They're right out close. And then there's space to kind of go into the booth and see more detail. There is a seating area here. Again, this is a huge booth space, so it may not always be possible, but you know, sometimes you can scale these ideas down and incorporate them. This is an example of branding. And I always tell people when I show this slide, you know, think about what would be displayed in this booth. There's nothing here that really says, you know, exactly what the person that's going to come to this booth is going to be selling. But you could get a general idea. It might be, you know, beef jerky. It might be maybe flannel shirts. It might be dairy products. It might be rustic decor items. You know, it probably isn't going to be, you know, shiny, modern lighting fixtures. It's not going to be, you know, maybe, you know, gourmet cooking utensils. So even though there's no product in this space, you can really get a feel for what it is that the brand is here. It's rustic, it's country, homegrown. You know, you can kind of see the cows in the background, so there's probably some sort of tie-in with farming. You can get a lot from, you know, thinking about the layout and the color scheme and the decor. This is another example of branding. This is 2 different jewelry booths, and if you take a look at them, they both sell jewelry. You know, that's pretty clear. But they both convey a very different brand. The one on the right is very clean, very modern. It looks like a lot of the stuff there is silver, very sleek. The type of jewelry that you're going to find here is very different than the one that you would find in the booth on the left. In the booth on the left, I would, you know, expect to find something that was maybe more vintage, you know, maybe a little bit more decorative, shiny, you know, having some sort of you know, real feminine decorative touches. And you can tell that just by looking at, you know, the design of the booth. Even if there wasn't any jewelry in either one of these booths, you could tell that. And so that's what you want to kind of keep in mind when you're designing your booth is, you know, if I take all the product out, are people still going to be able to get an idea of what I'm trying to do here? So here's some examples of some different ways to demonstrate. You know, with food, it's easy. So you see the picture on the left, you know, somebody is there maybe selling food supplies or cooking utensils or pots and pans or whatever. They're preparing a recipe there. People are watching and tasting. That's the best kind of demonstration because I like to eat. Then on the other side here on the right, it's obviously a power tool manufacturer. Again, not always something that you're going to be able to do at this particular show or any of the ones nearby, but this one, you know, they have a space outdoors where they've actually got these tools set up so people can come and try them out. You know, these are, again, not necessarily things I'm expecting you to do, but ways to think creatively about, you know, how can you demonstrate what you're trying to do. These 2 pictures are showing products that I think, you know, a retailer could really relate to. They could look at this and say, oh, you know, I could transfer this right to my store very easily. So if you look at the one on the left with all the scarves, you know, they have some mannequins there like you would probably find in a retail store. Some of the scarves are hanging along a rack there on the side, you know, divided by color, so they're really eye-catching. So a retailer could come in here and say, oh, I really love these, but I just don't know if I have room for them in the store. And then they might look at that and say, oh, I could put a rack up like that against the wall. It doesn't take up any room at all, and I can easily display my things there. So you're really kind of, putting this together with the retailer's space in mind. If you look at the picture on the right, there are some food additives here for people to be able to see how this would look in their store. You can see here that they've got a branded display case, so that's something you might consider, depending on what product you're selling. And again, we'll think of, want to make sure you think about cost with that and how that's going to get paid for, or if it's included. So talk to your advisor about that, but think about it. And so a person in a retail store could easily see, oh, I can buy this, I can take it, I can put it right on the shelf, and it's going to fit really easily in with my shop. These examples are kind of showing communication like I talked about. So it's just showing some signs, so people can read them pretty clearly. You can see things are labeled well, the prices are big enough for people to read. Just making sure that people are able to see what it is you're selling and any pertinent information, they can access it without having to ask 20 questions. These are a couple of booths that have some seating space in them. The one on the left is really not the best example, but I didn't find a lot, and I did like the seating area, at least in the middle. In this case, I think that this booth is much too crowded, and there's really not room to sit down with the buyer in the middle there where other people are trying to look. But you get the idea. There is a seating space here, and product is displayed, so that might be something. The one on the right I like a little bit better. You can see right up front there's like that table, with the chairs. Some of their giveaway items are over there on the left, so it's drawing people into the booth. Some of the information is toward the back, so they might have someone back there that they're talking to while someone else is sitting at the table putting an order in. So it's just a little bit of a different layout to get space to talk to people. Again, depending on the show, you may or may not be able to do that, but if you're able to, that might be something to think about. One really good piece of advice is to plan the booth layout ahead of time. If you know that you're going to have a 10-foot table at the show, find a 10-foot surface at home, in your garage, at a friend's house, wherever you can find it, and practice. Draw the layout design, think about how you want your booth to be. Practice your product displays and your placement, set it up, take it down, see how long it takes. Really practice that, because you really don't want to be in the middle of setting things up or have your booth look incomplete when people start coming through the show. Something that a lot of experienced show people always tell me is try to keep your materials portable and lightweight. Even your things that you're packaging, if you have bins that you carry from site to site, make sure that they're lightweight. If you have a dolly or something like that, make sure that they're things that are lightweight, that can travel easily, maybe fold up. Plan your attire and maybe your staff, if you've got other people coming to the show with you. Be neat and professional. And again, in keeping with your branding. If you're selling high-end jewelry, you maybe don't want to come in a t-shirt and jeans. So you want to make sure that how you look is in sync with your brand. Also be thinking about how your comfort level is going to be throughout the day as well. You're probably going to be doing a lot of standing, be doing a lot of walking. So you want to make sure that you're prepared for that. So we're getting close to, we're just talking about kind of, the show processes and how to follow up. So we're getting pretty close to the end. Are there any more questions that we've encountered so far? No? Okay. So once you're at the show, there's just a few things you kind of want to keep in mind. And again, some of these things seem like no-brainers. But, depending on how experienced you are, there may or may not be. And I think even if you're an experienced showgoer, some of these things, sometimes you just need a little reminder to kind of keep you on track. Probably one of the most important things to remember is to staff your booth. Be at your booth or have someone else there as much as possible, preferably all the time. Ideally, if you can have some help with you, whether it's an employee or whether it's a family member or friend, that's great. To be able to to give breaks and things like that, particularly if it's a really busy show. If that's not possible, then obviously, you're going to at some point need a break to either eat or use a restroom or, maybe just take a breath sometimes. If you have to step away from your booth, maybe have a sign and have some people, leave their contact information. Talk to one of the people nearby, one of the booth people nearby, and just let them know that you're stepping away for a minute. So if they see someone come up, they can say, oh, she's going to be right back. Do whatever you can to make sure that you don't miss too many people. Try to be approachable, so don't have out your phone or your tablet or be reading a book. If you're kind of involved in something sitting in the back of the booth, then people are going to be less likely to talk to you and ask questions and therefore less likely to buy. Stand if you can. Again, it shows that you're interested and gets you closer to the customer. Again, if you've got help, you can maybe take shifts. Maybe even have a high sitting stool or something like that if you really can't stand the whole time, or even if you need breaks. But something that kind of gets you up at eye level with people so you aren't kind of hunched down behind the table in your booth. Try not to cross your arms a lot. I know that's a bad habit that I have. If you're just kind of standing around, even when you're talking to people, you cross your arms and it kind of gives off a vibe of, you're trying to shut yourself off. So try to keep yourself open to being talking to people. Smile, be positive, greet people, even if they don't look like they're prospects or they don't look like they're interested in your booth. Still, having that pleasant demeanor can be helpful. And even if they're, kind of on the fence, sometimes that will draw them in. The other thing to remember is to try to be as knowledgeable as you can, and being able to answer questions. And I think, for most of you as owners and producers, that's not so much of an issue. But if you have someone who comes with you, or if you have an employee, make sure that you kind of give them some prep ahead of time so they know, if someone asks, what is this made of, or what type of fabric is in this particular scarf, that you can answer those basic questions. Again, do what you can to draw buyers in. Demonstrate in whatever way your product is able to be demonstrated. And again, it doesn't have to be just, an outright demonstration of your product, but it can be things like if you, if you create a piece of clothing, you should be wearing it. If you, make scarves, have one of the scarves on in your booth. People walk by and go, oh, that's a beautiful scarf. Well, I made it, and look at all the ones I'm going to sell here. If you have accessories, wear your own accessories, jewelry, those kinds of things. Food products are easy. You can provide samples. That definitely draws people in, creates a lot of attention, is a great way to demonstrate. If you have a product, that you can use in the booth, demonstrate how it's used. Show people how it can be used or what it does. Use video or photos to kind of show your production process. You can hang photos maybe in the back of the booth or have a laptop or a tablet with a video running so people can see how you make the product. Sometimes that creates a lot of interest. You might have some samples of the raw materials that you use. Maybe if you spin yarn and create fiber crafts, you may want to include, some raw wool or some different things like that people can look at. Anything that you can do to create interaction and excitement is going to draw a crowd, because if you get a couple of people stopping by to ask questions, then a couple more people stop by, and then before you know it, there's 4 or 5 people. And then what happens is everybody walks by and goes, oh, what's going on over there? And it creates more interest and people want to stop by. And even if there's not room for them, chances are they're more likely to cycle around again and try to find you. When you're interacting with the buyers, you want to make sure that you can be as clear as possible and to the point. And not that you don't want to be friendly, but you don't want to overtalk people. Most of them are there to buy. Most of them are not browsing, so you don't want to waste a lot of their time with information that they don't need. You want to make sure you use your elevator pitch and your features and benefits. Again, these are the things that will help you get your point across very quickly, very easily understood, and you don't lose people that way. Know your pricing, your payment terms, your turnaround time. Making sure that you're aware of all the things that are going to happen after the show and being able to inform buyers of that. You may want to practice with a little role playing. Get a friend or someone who can pretend to be a buyer, or maybe if you know someone with a retail shop who really isn't in the market for your products, but they'd be willing to help you out. Make it easy for buyers to work with you, so have all of your information and materials ready to go, that wholesale packet, your order forms, your line sheets, all of that stuff. Try not to place too many restrictions and requirements on orders. If it gets too confusing or too difficult, you're going to lose them. And then the other thing is you want to make sure you collect leads for follow-up. So, the people that are making a purchase, you're going to have their information from the order. People who maybe didn't order that day but want to be contacted later, or people who think they might want to order but they're not sure, make sure you get that contact information so you can follow up. And what I usually tell people is if they give you a card, it's great to write a little note on the back. This is Susie from ABC Store, and she was interested in, my spring line of blah, 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 blah. Contact her in, April. So that later on you remember, because if you're seeing a lot of people throughout the day, you may not always remember, what did this person want? Why was I going to call them? And that way you don't miss those leads for later on. Be ready for orders. Have your order forms ready. Have them maybe on a few clipboards ready to go with your duplicates. Have some pens out. Think about ship dates. Make sure that you're able to accommodate shipments for customers, and really be aware of what your production time is. And as orders are coming in, you want to think about spreading those orders out so that you don't get back from the show and within 3 weeks you've got to do 1 million orders and you're just going to be working 24/7 and still not going to get them all done. So know ahead of time, in the first 3 weeks I can do X number of units, in the next 3 weeks after that I can do this number of units, and keep track of that as orders come in so that you can say to someone, they could say, can you get it to me in 2 weeks? Well, I can't get it to you in 2 weeks, but I could get it to you in 4. So that you're not disappointing them, that you're not over-promising, things that you can't deliver. Use a calendar so that you can kind of track those things as you're taking orders. The best policy is for first-time orders to have payment up front, have them pay that day, or have them give you the payment information and tell them the payment's going to be processed before it ships. That way, you've got payment, especially if it's someone you've not dealt with before and you don't know their history. It's the best way to protect yourself. So after the show ends, you don't just pack up your goodies and go home and that's the end of it. After the show is when the real work begins, and that's really where you start to build those relationships with the retailers, and so you want to make sure that everything goes smoothly after the show so that they are left with a good impression and you get a repeat order. So you want to make sure you follow up on orders, try to honor ship dates that you've agreed to. If you can't, make sure that you speak with the retailers and let them know and see if you can make other arrangements. Communication is always the key. Label all your items that have shipped with item numbers so that the product packaging has that on it. It'll save time if there's a return, or also when you're packaging things on your end. Make sure there's a packing list in the box so that not only can you verify that everything that you plan on being in the box to ship is there, but then also on the receiver's end they can verify that as well. And again, send that invoice separately so that you can be sure it doesn't get lost or tossed out with the empty box. You want to make sure you follow up on any leads that you collected. So try to be as personalized as you can with that contact, and again, that's where those notes come in handy. Excuse me. So if you have those notes to refer to, you'll be able to know who the person was, what you were going to, provide them, or what follow-up you were going to do. You may want to create a special after the show to encourage people to either place more orders, or if someone didn't order, for the next 6 weeks, if you place another order after the show, you get maybe free shipping or some kind of discount or a free display fixture. Also, make sure that you add those contacts to your email list as well. So you can invite them to future shows, you can send them information about specials that you might have coming up. When you do that, always provide them with an opt-out so they aren't inundated with, you know, all of these pieces of information from you, whether it's email or snail mail, that they don't want. And so then your next step is to follow up with the SBDC if you really want some help in getting prepared for you know, either this show or any others coming up. My contact information is there on the screen, my phone number and email, and I'm here in Canton. There's also contact information there for Karen Stalin in our Plattsburgh office if that's closer for you. If Watertown or Albany ends up being a little closer for you, give me a call or drop an email and I can let you know how to get in touch with them as well. You know, we really want to try to be the most convenient to you that we can. And the last thing I want to mention to all of you is a new program that we have here at the Canton SBDC. We received a grant from the Alcoa Foundation that allowed us to create a program to work with small businesses in helping them improve their e-commerce strategies. And that can include really any part of doing business online. It can be website development, search engine optimization, it may be social media strategy, help with, you know, setting up your social media, evaluating what might be the best, learning how to use video with your website, you know, learning how to sell online, anything in the realm of e-commerce and e-marketing. And so what that grant allowed us to do was hire a full-time staff person who can work directly with businesses for those services. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to give us a call here. Even if you're in one of the other areas, what we'll do is, you know, hook you up with an advisor from your local office, and then you would be able to work with Renee as well. So regardless of where you are, we can provide those. All services are free. So there's never a charge when you use SBDC services. You know, I'd encourage you to get in touch with us. If you have any questions after today or between now and the show or even after the show, you know, we're there to help. Lauren's there to help. You know, always remember that there are all of these agencies there that are, you know, able and willing to give you guidance. So don't be afraid to ask a question. There's no question too small. So are there any questions out there that I haven't addressed? It looks like we just had those couple. It looks like I've gotten them all. Any other questions that anyone wants to send? Okay, looks like no. When I end the webinar, hopefully, if I've done things correctly, a survey will pop up for you. But if not, you will be getting it in a follow-up email. So if you wouldn't mind taking the time to do that, it's important to our program to kind of have those records of, you know, the feedback that we get on the programs, and there's a space in there for, you know, giving us feedback on other things that you may want to see in the future as well. So please do that. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact any of us, and we would do whatever we can to help you out. And with that, I will end the webinar, and I hope you all have a good evening, and I hope to talk to a lot of you very soon.